With a career spanning over a quarter of a century, 4 distinct generations and sales of over 1.2 million vehicles, Renault Espace is the large people carrier that started it all. We're told that today's subtly evolved Mark IV version is state-of-the-art when it comes to big MPVs. Let's see.
In the beginning, well, back in 1984, there was a large European 7-seater people carrier. The people carrier was called Espace, and for families, it was good. So good, in fact, for its maker Renault that all the French brand's rivals copied it. Suddenly every continental family had to have an MPV, leading to a resultant volume of demand that Renault just couldn't meet. Why? Well, unsure as to whether the whole people carrying idea would work, right in the beginning they'd farmed out production to the relatively small specialist maker Matra, the people who'd pitched the whole Espace concept to them in the first place. Now, Renault could have taken things back in-house, of course, but by the time MPV success looked certain, their production lines were already committed to a smaller, more affordable interpretation of the concept, embodied by the hugely successful scenic Mini MPV. Now, with only limited production available then for the Espace, Renault's only option was to push its largest MPV, its largest people carrier, up market to compete with luxury estate cars. A trend that also continued when this 4th generation model was launched way back in 2002.
By that time, the French brand had at last got around to making the thing itself and replacing the plastic body used by earlier models with a conventional pressed steel affair. But it was too late. By now, the volume part of the large MPV market had been surrendered to the Ford Galaxy and the Volkswagen Charan, as well as to big MPVs from Seat, Peugeot and Citroën. In Britain at least, the Espace was an also-ran, forced to reposition itself as a quirky, stylised option, luxurious enough to offer bigger families an alternative to a large, plush, executive estate car.
And so things would have continued had not late in 2010, Renault decided to give this car one final lease of life. More frugal Euro 5 engines were adopted, the range was simplified, equipment levels were bolstered, and a mild facelift introduced. This, we were told, was the people carrier evolved to its most sophisticated state-of-the-art, the definitive MPV from the people who popularised the whole thing in the first place, and the car we're looking at here. Automotive styling ever changes, but interiors rarely tend to be unique, except in this case. Slide behind the wheel of an Espace, and there's nothing else you could be driving. Knobs and buttons banished across the stylised dash. For the driver, there are no distractions from the primary task of steering this huge laid-back lounge from dance lessons to dog training to Disneyland, which is exactly as it should be. Rather than the vast, confusing array of engines that were once offered with this particular model, there are, with this post-2010 facelifted version, just two, or really just one, since there are 150 and 175 brake horsepower variants of the same 2-litre DCI diesel engine. This, the higher powered variant, comes only with an automatic gearbox, while the lower powered DCI 150 comes only with a manual transmission. Now both are reasonably refined, but can get a bit vocal if you rev them hard. Performance is unaffected by your choice of body style, and largely, it must be said, unaffected by your choice of engine. Performance being rest to 60 in around 11 seconds on the way to a top speed of around 120 miles an hour right across the range. I've opted for the DCI 175 automatic version here, since I can't really see why anyone would want to change gears themselves in a car like this. As for the driving experience, well, it is of course comfort orientated, as it should be, but not so wafty as to make riding twisty roads akin to sailing in a cross-channel ferry on a choppy sea. Body roll is well controlled, significantly better than it was in previous generation versions, and the ride is class-leadingly excellent over all but the poorest surfaces. Even so, the whole dynamic experience that this car serves up is nothing like as composed as in a Ford Galaxy or even a Volkswagen Charan. Still, if you can't really see the point of pin-sharp handling in a people carrier, it'll suit you just fine. Though personally I could do with the steering being a little less vague. It's perfect around town though, where the whole potentially daunting experience of manoeuvring over 16 foot of Gallic real estate turns out to be far easier than expected. Now, there are certain kinds of car that almost everyone recognises, and Renault Espace is one of them. Actually, the familiar looks of this Mark IV model disguise the fact that it's fundamentally different from the 3 generations that went before. They were plastic-bodied designs, or more accurately, reinforced glass fibre-bodied designs. This one, in contrast, rides on more conventional pressed steel underpinnings, shared rather unpromisingly with a previous generation Laguna. Fortunately, this change has added no more than around 110 kilograms to the overall weight, thanks to the use of plastic in the wings and the tailgate, and aluminium in the doors and in the bonnet. The mild facelift that this design received at the end of 2010 was the first to significantly alter the looks in any way, and even then it wasn't by much, the main change being the addition of these bi-xenon headlights with their cornering lamps and integrated daytime LEDs. Inside it's all very modern and high-tech, despite the fact that this design dates all the way back to 2002. It's still like being inside some kind of motor show concept car, with all the switches swept out of sight and the driver positioned way back from the dash. The panoramic windscreen with its ultra-thin pillars seems even further away as you survey a shallow domed centre instrument section with a large digital display. Most of the functions somehow, in various convoluted ways, operate via the steering column stalks, and those that don't have mainly to do with heating and ventilation, the controls for which are sited on a flying saucer-shaped panel on the driver's armrest. Now, you need to spend a bit of time with the driver's handbook working out how it all functions before setting off, as none of it is especially intuitive, but then maybe that's why I like it. But you'll be wanting to know about cabin flexibility, which rather confusingly has fewer seating permutations than the previous generation Espace. Of more of an issue for potential buyers though will be the fact that the seats, the rear seats, can't be folded flat flush into the floor, as is the case with say a Ford Galaxy or a Volkswagen Charan. You can only fold them in half like this. If you want to go further, then you have to physically take the seats out, not a job for the faint-hearted or poorer back, and find somewhere to store them in the garage. But you shouldn't necessarily be put off. After all, how often will you really want to be taking seats out or folding them into the floor? Renault's contention is that modularity, in other words, the extent to which the seats can be repositioned around the cabin to suit various permutations of people and packaging, is much more important, and you can see their point. The Espace is able to offer this courtesy of 8 aluminium tracks along the floor, along which can slide and or be repositioned each of the 5 rearward seats. You can even turn the middle row of seats around to create a kind of office-type circle of friends space. Push forward the middle row for access to the very rear, and one of the first things that you notice having clambered in is that the seats back here are identical to those in the second row, in contrast to the way that many rivals treat third row passengers as third-class citizens. You still rather put kids than adults back here, but most adults, as long as they're not over 6 foot, should be pretty much okay in these rearmost seats as long as the journey isn't too lengthy. And in the middle row, well, even a trio of basketball players should be perfectly comfortable here. Travellers in this section of the Espace favoured with their own fan controls, aircon vents and overhead lights. Plus, they'll be able to slide their seats backwards and forwards, either to prioritise their own legroom or that of those behind. Boot space depends very much on your choice of body style, of course, and is easier to access if you've opted for the extra cost opening tailgate glass that enables you to put smaller items in without having to lift the whole rear door. Now, if you're travelling 7 up in the standard Espace model, your luggage options really are very limited because there'll just be 291 litres available behind the rearmost seats. Of course, if you can somehow remove both third and second row seating, it opens up vastly more space with up to 2,860 litres available. But it's this Grand Espace model that offers the far more flexible option. Even when all 7 seats are in use, this vehicle is still able to give them 456 litres of space for their luggage. And with all third and second row seating removed, you've up to 3,050 litres on offer. Now, if you're looking for the most affordable large people carrier you can buy, then this isn't it. Renault having long ago abandoned the budget end of this market sector to others. Still, when you look at what you actually get, the value proposition on offer here really isn't too bad. You're looking at paying somewhere in the £25,000 to £30,000 bracket, and Renault dealers will usually be willing to sharpen pencils. You're looking at a £1,500 premium to go from the standard Espace body style to the lengthier Grand Espace. And I'd recommend that you pay that if you're going to be transporting 7 people on any kind of regular basis. If funds permit, I'd also suggest that you try forking out the extra £2,500 to progress from the manual DCI 150 to the automatic DCI 175 version. It's a configuration that suits this car much better. Now, with regard to rivals, well, they'll depend really on which of the 2 body styles you choose. The standard Espace competes with conventional large people carriers, so it's a few £100 more in DCI 175 form than you pay for, say, a Seat Alhambra 2-litre TDI 170 PS, and a few £100 less than you pay for, say, a Ford Galaxy 2-litre TDCI 163 PS. Against a Volkswagen Charan, which in 2-litre TDI 170 PS form will cost you nearly £30,000, this Renault looks very good value indeed. But what about the Grand Espace model? Well, assuming that you find Hyundai's much cheaper but undeniably utilitarian 8-seater i800 model a little basic for your tastes, then the rivals to that car are mainly big vans with windows. Say Mercedes Viano, which in comparable diesel form is about £1,200 more, and Volkswagen's Caravelle, which in rival TDI 180 PS form is around £6,000 more. Now, whether you choose Espace or Grand Espace body styles with either DCI 175 or DCI 150 power, then you should find your car to be decently well equipped. All models these days come with Carmanak TomTom Live satellite navigation, LED daytime running lights, sports style upholstery with durable Teflon protection and 17-inch alloy wheels. Now, I was a bit surprised to find this rear tailgate opening glass section on the options list, but otherwise the extra cost items seem reasonable. By Xenon directional headlamps, a rear seat DVD entertainment system that should keep the kids quiet with 2 16.9-inch colour screens built into the back of the front seat headrests, and a vast electric panoramic glass sunroof with a surface area of no less than 2.46 square metres. Those companies buying the top automatic Grand Espace model for executive transportation may want to consider an Initiale Lux pack, which replaces the usual 5 rearward seats with 4 seats with armrests to create a kind of boardroom type atmosphere. You also get a multifunctional tune point for portable music players, an advanced alarm system, as you can see, metallic paint, parking sensors, and you can expect to find Western European mapping for the sat-nav. Now, whichever Espace model you choose, you can expect front, side and curtain airbags, together with side bags for the second row seats, plus the usual electronic assistance for braking, traction and stability, to make sure that hopefully you'll never have to use them. Now, running costs for potential family Espace owners will be important, but perhaps not quite as important as they would be with a more budget-orientated people carrier, which is just as well, since this Espace, despite its adoption of Euro 5 engine technology, lags slightly behind its rivals in this area. So where a rival Ford Galaxy TDCi 163 PS or a Volkswagen Chiron TDI 170 PS would return you around 150 grams per kilometre of CO2 and around 50 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle, the DCI 150 version of this Renault manages 43.5 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 170 grams per kilometre of CO2, figures that fall to 39.2 miles to the gallon and 189 grams per kilometre if you opt for the automatic DCI 175 variant. Still, that's not too bad for a vehicle weighing over 1.8 tonnes, and a large 83 litre fuel tank means it's not unreasonable to expect an operating range of around 780 miles. Opting for the heavier Grande Espace body shape makes no difference to fuel consumption, which means that the returns of this version stack up rather better, competing as it is with a different set of bulkier, heavier rivals. Insurance groupings range between 21 and 24 for the Espace and between 22 and 25 for the Grande Espace. People who buy people carriers out of choice rather than necessity are people who tend to like this Espace very much indeed, for its size, its practicality, its design flair and its unrivaled comfort. It's a combination of virtues that is still pretty much unmatched in a sea of look-alike large people carriers. Its rivals, after all, tend to be vehicles that are either bigger versions of existing compact MPVs or essentially glorified vans with windows. The Espace remains one of the very few large seven-seater people carriers purpose-designed to carry 7 people in living room luxury. To be frank, I don't think the most recent improvements have altered its buying proposition very much. But short of fundamentally changing what this French contender is all about, that was never going to happen. Ultimately, if Espace motoring is your idea of what people carrying should be, then little else is likely to satisfy.